You can be technically skilled at art, but your work can still be boring. That's what I learned after receiving 3 comments on my latest redraw video that provided the same feedback. I liked the old version better. Welcome to my channel. My name is Mercury, a digital artist, and I'm constantly looking to improve my skills. So, let's level up together. Let's take a close look at those comments. The first comment I received was this. Simple and to the point, but I didn't ignore it. Instead, I took a long look at the thumbnail, the old and the new side by side, and I started to see what I had lost. Hours later, a second comment arrived, confirming my suspicions. From that point on, I could not let it go. And with the third comment, the urge to redraw the redrawing sparked. Here are the 4 things the comments pointed out: the expression, the perspective, the more natural posing, and the contrast. I'm going to talk through these changes as I correct them, so if you have these problems in your own art, you're not going to want to skip to the end. Let's get started. The first thing I want to work on is the expression, since re-angling the face will be most destructive to the drawing. In the redraw, the expression is calm and serene and her gaze is focused on the viewer. Although it's arguably well drawn, this combination is more of a default that doesn't add anything to the piece. On the other hand, the original has an expression of awe and surprise as she looks at something outside the boundaries of the illustration. This creates a sense of curiosity regarding what she is looking at to create such response. To recreate the expression on the newer version, I won't be drawing over it. Rather, I'll use the transform and liquefy tools to shift the angle of her head and her features before shaping them into the more interesting expression. I had a bit of trouble creating the upward gaze of the eyes at first, but after a while, I realized that changing where the upper eyelids peak is an easy indicator that the character is looking up. This emphasizes the curved plane of the head, which will appear higher in the center and lower towards the edges. And with the return to time-lapse, I'll finish up the eyes before tilting her head back to increase the effects. Then came the mouth. I tried to mimic the shape of the mouth in the original, but eventually I had to reference what a surprised mouth looks like to get the effect that I was going for. References are especially useful for something as nuanced as expressions. It's hard to realize when you make faces and read expressions on autopilot every day, but even a slight tweak can make the expression read differently. I'd say this goes double for the mouth, since the majority of expressions are mainly distinguished by different combinations of the eyes and mouth. How do you think it turned out in the end? Finally, I adjusted the hair since one side plane was now notably more exposed than the other, and the center line of her face had shifted. I also tucked the top of her head, as we would see much less of it due to her upward gaze. Even the hair along her neck needs to be adjusted to emphasize the new angle of her head. Now, after a bit of cleaning up, the expression was set. Not to mention, tilting her head back did add a perspective change. In addition to that change in perspective, I enlarged her upper half as if she was leaning on the railing like she does in the original. Like this, her body would be bent towards the camera, so her upper half would be slightly larger. This creates a more relaxed pose compared to standing upright as if she were having her picture taken. After staring at the drawing for quite some time, there was still a stiffness to the pose that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The hands. It's hard to equate how much influence the hands have on the overall impression of the drawing, but it became clear that these hands, stuck together like mannequin digits, were not doing any favors, especially not when compared with the original. For the front hand, I simply pulled the pointer away from the rest of the fingers. Since she's gripping the underside of the ledge, it's not unreasonable that her fingers would group up. However, when referencing hands, you will find it rare that all 4 fingers are mirroring each other. More often than not, the pointer, the pinky, or both are doing their own thing. I incorporated that here. Similarly, for the backhand, the fingers are all the same thickness and angled on the same plane. This is especially unrealistic when wrapping their hands around a cylinder. Go ahead, place your hand on your upper forearm. Unless you grip tight, your fingers do not bend so similarly. For this reason, I observed the original and tried to capture the style. So, here's what we have so far compared to the original, and this is without editing the contrast. When talking about colored drawings, it's important to remember that contrast is more than values. With colors, the three parts are value, hue, and saturation. Any one of these can be used to increase the contrast in a drawing. Let's first observe the saturation contrast. Put simply, everything in the picture is lacking saturation, which moves all the colors closer to gray and obscures the contrast between them. Increasing the saturation will allow colors to show more of their own hue, which brings us to hue contrast. At the moment, a lot of the image is hovering around mauve and lavender. Even the dress, which is predominantly coral, isn't immune due to the lack of saturation. To separate the figure from the background, I'll overlay the figure with orange and the background with blue, which should pull their hues apart. Finally, to increase the value contrast, the orange hue will be set to Add Glow, a coloring mode that saturates and lightens the color, while the blue hue will be set to Multiply, which saturates and darkens. Together, these two quick layers will create the much needed contrast. I even added additional blue to the railing to emphasize its closeness to the camera. When that wasn't quite enough, I included more contrast within the figure, emphasizing the shadows cast by the tool. This will break up the larger shapes within the figure. With more contrast in the drawing, now the figure is more easily distinguishable from the background at a glance. All that's left is to clean up the colors and the lines from all the edits. We'll have one last time lapse before I start to give my final thoughts and reveal the new redraw. After everything, I have to admit, I like the newest version much better. Although the redrawing was fine, it lacked interest with its stiff posing, perfectly pleasant expression, and dull coloration. It was pretty, but boring. It can be hard to get feedback, especially on something that you worked hard on. But not all feedback has to be taken negatively. If you can shape it into a lesson, you'll always be able to keep getting better. If you liked this video and are looking for more, let me know with a like and comment. I have plenty of Speedpaint videos up on my channel, redrawing my old art or making original illustrations. Be sure to check them out and level up soon.